Hi everybody, welcome back, glad you could tune in again. So I want to tell you about one particularly fruitful and interesting conversation that we had during one of our discussions at the Bible and Theology programme for the young people at All Saints, when we were thinking about the fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment, trying to think about its application in practical terms to the Christian Lord's Day. And we were thinking particularly about one specific question which had very pressing implications for the young people in the class at that moment. One of the students asked, is it okay for us to do homework on the Lord's Day? Now, I'm pretty sure this was a genuine question. I don't think it was an attempt to generate an excuse for not having completed the homework that was set for them by Monday morning. I think it was a genuine question, and it seemed to reflect the situation that many of the students sometimes find themselves in. We did a quick survey. How many people occasionally find themselves doing a little bit of homework or catching up on schoolwork or preparation for something on the Lord's Day? And probably 2/3 of the hands in the class went up. And then I asked, okay, for how many people is it quite regular, 2 or 3 times a month or more? And probably just under half of the hands remained up at that point. So this is clearly an issue that the young people are wrestling with. Obviously, they're working really hard. I have to say, just a quick aside, they're doing a fantastic job of keeping up with all the reading and the study in the classes that I've been teaching. It's been an absolute blast to be working through that material with them. I hope they've been enjoying it as much as I have, and I've learned a great deal already just from doing that teaching with them. But clearly, here's an issue. Is it okay to do our homework on the Lord's Day? So how do we address this question? Helpful, I guess, just to remind ourselves of the basic biblical parameters, just to make sure we're operating within the right sort of coordinates, so to speak, and not just saying whatever comes to our mind under pragmatic considerations and so on. What does the Bible say about the kind of work that we ought to be doing on the Lord's Day? Remember, one of the fundamental commands on the fourth commandment is to rest from our ordinary labour. So if it's the kind of work that you ordinarily do, probably it's the kind of work that you ought to not be doing on the Lord's Day. At least in general, that seems to be the priority. But remember also that we highlighted that other things about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is rest so that you can worship. Well, homework isn't really worship in that sense, is it? And it's certainly not really fellowship in the sense of, hanging out with other Christians and that kind of encouraging, relaxing way. Is it a work of necessity or a work of mercy? Well, it's stretching a point to say that doing your homework is a work of mercy, although there is a sense in which it's an act of kindness to other students in the discussion to be doing a good job of your homework. It's not exactly pulling an ox out of a ditch, though, is it? Is it a work of necessity? Well, this is probably a little more complicated to answer. I think you could probably make a case for saying that if you occasionally find yourself under the pressure of time and unexpected circumstances, just running out of time on Monday through Saturday and just having no other time left to do your homework other than on Sunday, then occasionally that probably would come under that heading, a work of necessity. Let's imagine, for example, that you've been helping with your dad or a friend to move his business all day Saturday and all the previous week, and that had taken up loads of time. Or let's imagine that a tree had fallen down on the house of a friend or a neighbour or a relative, and you'd been working up until late in the evening trying to get things sorted out so the house was safe and sealed from the elements and so on. That might have taken up the time you usually spent working. And so if you then shifted your work to the Lord's Day, that kind of is a work of necessity or a work of mercy in lieu of the work that you did on those other days for those people. But we'd probably want to say, wouldn't we, that this isn't something we'd want to make a permanent habit out of. If working in our normal way, like this, with homework, became a habit, it's going to be a habit that's difficult to break. And after the long silence in the class had persisted for 8 or 10 seconds at that point, I suggested that we probe that issue a little bit further by just thinking about what kind of work are you young people in particular doing now? What you're doing now, as you're studying, is you're preparing for the future. You are learning things which are going to be, Lord willing, a blessing to you in the future, whether they're issues of just understanding the world around you in general terms, or Christian godliness and maturity, or whether they're more specific vocational things. You're learning maths, or you're learning physics, or you're training to be an accountant, or whatever it is you're doing. All of this is preparation for the future. But there's something else that you're being prepared for the future in as well. You're being prepared in habits of work. The disciplines of how you work in the future will be critically important for your fruitfulness and faithfulness as a believer in Christ. And you are forming those habits today. How you work today when you're doing your homework, when you're doing your reading, when you're doing your study, when you're solving those maths problems, when you're reading Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, the habits that you bring to that work today will be the habits that you take into the future and which form your working practices as a grown man or woman. And so the question I have for you is, what kind of habits do you want to have when you're 25, 30, 35, 40? When you're married? When you're a mother or a father? What kind of working habits do you want to have? Do you want to have the kind of working habits where regularly, in the busyness and chaos of your life, work spills over into the Lord's Day and impinges upon your family's ability to rest and to worship? Or do you want to have the kind of life where you've got the chaos under control? Yeah, you're busy, but somehow you keep it within bounds so that you know when you're working and you know when you're resting, and you can ensure that your family rests then too. Because if you want to have that kind of disciplined life in the future, now is the day to start training for it. You will not magically get to the age of 25, get married, begin a family, and suddenly become a disciplined and wise and fruitful human being if you've not been previously. And there's worse to come, because your work is going to get more busy, more demanding, longer hours, more challenging, more intrusive. So if you can't tame this little baby dragon now, you will not be able to tame the full-grown dragon of your career when you're older. Same thing goes for other aspects of our lives, the housework and so on, the looking after children. Though, of course, many aspects of these do flow over into the Lord's Day out of necessity. Nonetheless, there is a sense in which all of us need to be learning the habits of discipline and getting on with the job, which will serve us well in the future, because the demands of that work will only increase. So one of my challenges to the young people back a few days ago when we talked about this, and again today, is, and was, can you think about how best to put into practice the disciplines of work that will serve you well in the future, so that you become the most fruitful and faithful man or woman, husband or wife, father or mother, in 10 or 15 years' time that you can possibly be. Truth be told, the work isn't going to go away if you ignore it. One of the challenges I left the young people to mull on is whether we couldn't possibly be a little more proactive sometimes in getting the work done. I asked the young people to imagine two houses that had different approaches, shall we say, to the task of washing up. In the first house, which is a house that many, many years ago I had an experience of living in the first house, any time that you used any crockery or cutlery from the kitchen, you would just pop it in the sink or leave it on the counter or put it on the table or leave it on the floor or something until such time as somebody else needed it. And then when they needed a plate or some cutlery or a bowl or anything, they would have to root around, find something, wash it, and then they'd use it, and then they'd probably leave it dirty somewhere else for the next person to come and find it. That's house number one, where you do the washing up just before you need the item that you're washing. There's another way, of course, of organising your house, where you do the washing up immediately after you've used the item in question. Now, what's intriguing about that is both houses do the same amount of washing up. Assuming that people eat roughly the same amount, you'd need to wash up the same number of things, but there is all the difference in the world between doing the job as soon as it's created, I'm going to wash this dirty plate now, and leaving the job until, well, whenever the final bell tolls and you desperately need that plate and you have to wash it after it's been sitting there going mouldy for a week and smelling like we probably don't want to think about, do we? In other words, what happens if we procrastinate is that life just gets really messy and the amount of work doesn't decrease. It stays the same. And so there's a lesson there about getting on with the work as quickly as we can. And coming back to our original subject, the subject of the Sabbath, or the Lord's Day, we may find, you young people, may find that getting on with the work as soon as you possibly can is a helpful way to free up the Lord's Day from some of those homework commitments a little more often. Such, at least, was the subject of our conversation a few days ago. Hope that's helpful to you. May the Lord bless you, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye for now.